Today was the day. I rushed downstairs, though I wasn't fully awakened, and turned into the living room. How surprising, my father had just arrived with the mail. With a delighted squeal, I searched around in the mail for my new Pokemon Silver game. When I discovered the little package, I snatched it up without a word and raced upstairs to begin my ancient pixelated journey in Johto. I heard about the new and improved Pokemon games Soul Silver and Heart Gold, but I preferred the old classic Game Boy versions, and I had chosen Silver. I ripped the package open and lifted the large gray cartridge into the light of my window. I grinned excitedly, for I had never had one of the old Pokemon games in my possession. I reached down for my red GBA and pulled it onto my bed. I slipped the cartridge into the slot, switched the power on, and settled into a comfortable position. The regular Game Boy logo started on the screen, Game Freak, and then it went to the title screen. For some reason, there was no new game option. I shrugged and chose the saved file. The location was in the Whirl Islands. In the midst of darkness, I knew instantly that I needed a Pokemon with the move Flash, and I brought the start menu up. All the normal options popped up, and I soon realized that the trainer's name was Crad. I blinked slowly as I clicked the Pokemon option. As I'd expected, Crad's team has 6 full slots, 3 Pokemon and 3 eggs. I checked the eggs summary. They were all close to hatching. For a brief moment, I wondered what Pokemon Crad was trying to hatch. Then I switched to examining his Pokemon. All his Pokemon were level 5. I was astonished. Level 5? And stuck in the middle of Whirl Islands? What kind of trainer is this? Did all of his Pokemon know one-hit KO moves? There was a Typhlosion, a Noctowl, and an Eevee. Their nicknames sent a wave of forbidding rippling throughout my chest. I've been reborn. Noctowl being I've, Typhlosion, Bin, and Eevee reborn. To be honest, I wasn't anywhere near scared, though I felt a cold shoulder. The names made me feel like I wasn't alone in my room, and the ghostly hand the girl mentioned in Lavender Town was brushing along my neck, like a slimy snake, moist, cold, and wet along the bare flesh. The only real thought swimming through my mind was, what kind of sick trick was this Crad guy trying to pull, hacking into this old Silver game? I went through his Pokemon moves. I've and Bin didn't know Flash. I was beginning to lose hope in this dumb hacked game, until I scrolled through Reborn's attacks and located Flash. My heart skipped a beat and I smiled. There was one good thing about this cartridge. I selected Reborn and clicked Flash. A bright, blinding light flickered in the cave and remained as so for several moments before fading into a total darkness. I could not see the sprite of Crad any longer. My satisfied grin slowly progressed into a frown. I was sure that Flash was supposed to light caves up, not make them even darker. Suddenly, a text box lit up. I gasped at what I read. In the pitch blackness, I began smashing the control keys. Nothing moved, but I could hear the brief thud sound of running into a wall and not being able to pass. That's when I realized that the wall sound was the only source of music in the cavern. There was no music, none whatsoever. Besides the thud, the whole cave was frighteningly silent. There was a sudden flash, and I heard the cries of my party Pokemon, all mashed into one distorted groan, rising and lowering in pitch time again. It lasted for 1 solid minute before fading off into the distance, echoing like it was sounding from the very back of the cave. A picture of Noctowl appeared. It stayed for at least 30 seconds, and I couldn't move at all. The cutscene was still running, then the Noctowl picture became a mash of distorted pixels. In just seconds, the pile of pixels formed and shaped a hoot hoot. It took several squints, multiple close looks, and a ton of thinking to figure out that what the picture was showing me was de-evolution, or backwards evolution. I felt a sour bile rising in the pit of my throat. After gazing at Hoot Hoot's sprite, I pressed the A button and a yes or no menu appeared. Yes or no what? I huffed in irritation at the GBA and began to think deeply. When I had finished pondering over whether I should select yes or no, I decided to click no as my answer for the invisible question. So I did. A text box appeared as the Hoot Hoot image faded. Oh, that was a sound that hadn't happened before the Hoot Hoot picture. Is one of Crad's eggs hatching? A Typhlosion picture appeared, and another yes or no menu. I selected no. The picture faded like the Hoot Hoot image did, and finally, the last picture of a Pokemon appeared. It was a ghastly looking Eevee, disgusting, haunted, and terrifying. It was a small Eevee, smaller than the average sprite, and it had no eyes, and it was missing a hind leg. Yes or no? No. Instead of fading softly, the image spread apart and shattered with 12 pieces sliding off the screen, as though the screen was slick as ice. I gasped, sudden realization sparking in my mind. Noctowl, Typhlosion, and Eevee? My Pokemon! Immediately, sick with worry, I checked my party Pokemon. Ive was now a meek-looking Hoot Hoot, with a saddened, one-eyed gaze. Bin was an ice-blue Quilava, with no flames and an angered expression. Reborn was what the image of the Eevee had shown. No eyes, small, and weak. However, instead of only one leg missing, there were 2, and its tail had become a stump. I shuddered as I checked the Pokemon's moves. Ive's moves were now Fly, Sing, Hypnosis, and Curse. Bin's moves were Curse, Nightmare, Dream Eater, and Sing. Reborn's only moves were Flash and Grudge. I canceled out of the start menu and continued to move around. Suddenly, a text appeared. Oh. I expected one of those Pokemon pictures to appear, and then another yes or no menu, but instead, nothing happened. I finally gave in, believing that this meant that something had happened to my Pokemon team. When I checked, the 3 eggs that took up the last slots had hatched at this same time. How unusual, yet so exciting. There was a Cyndaquil, a Pikachu, and a shiny Celebi. This hack was just getting more surprising. I canceled out and found my sprite in a rectangular room. Luckily, it was no longer dark. I was afraid that I would be eternally stuck in the tiny 4-sided room. Suddenly, the roar of a Pokemon echoed in the room, and I was immediately engaged in a Pokemon battle. I gasped, but couldn't get the whole sound out of my throat as the sprite of my opponent appeared, Lugia. The sprite looked enraged. Its eyes were crimson red and bright against its sprite. A text box appeared, and I realized that Lugia was speaking to me. Darkness, it surrounds us. We want to be free. Then the battle began. I sent out my level 1 Cyndaquil. It was a male and had Bin's movesets. I selected Sing in hopes of putting the legendary Pokemon to sleep, but Lugia attacked first with Aeroblast and easily knocked out Cyndaquil. Instead of the regular Cyndaquil fainted, the text box read, "I've died." There was a flash. When it eased, Lugia lacked one wing. Its eyes were shut tight, and its level was scratched out. Peering closer, I picked out the level. Level 155. I sent out Pikachu, hoping that it would know some electric-type moves that could weaken Lugia. The Pikachu was male, and it looked rather depressed. As opposed to its normal joyous sprite, his eyes were slits of black, and his ears were flattened. 3 long bloody gashes were marked around his back and looping to his forearms. I couldn't choose a move this time. Lugia attacked first. Bam! Aeroblast. Obviously, it knocked out the Pikachu. Bean died. My only other option was Celebi, for Ive and Bean had literally disappeared from my party Pokemon. There was also Reborn, but for some unknown reason, it was at 1 HP and had the sleep status. I sent out Celebi, only to find that Lugia's other wing was lying next to its sprite. Its mouth was wide open, as if crying out agonizing screams. It was teetering on one foot, for the other was now a bloodied stump. I could not choose a move, but Celebi struck Lugia first. She used Double Slap, which constantly slapped the giant bird and ended up draining approximately 30 HP from it altogether. It was Lugia's turnout, and I instantly expected a one-hit KO from its moves. That didn't happen. What happened next in the battle confused me greatly. Lugia's attack wasn't a simple Aeroblast or even another attack. It was a frenzy of moves. Lugia used Aeroblast. Lugia used Aeroblast. Then Lugia's lost its other foot, which was followed by a swift white flash. Lugia used Fly. Lugia used Steel Wing. Lugia used Recover, and it had no effect. Lugia used Recover again, but it still had no effect. Lugia's sprite shrunk slightly. Lugia used Wing Attack. Lugia used Wing Attack again, and then he used it again. Lugia shrunk a little bit more, then its sprite began to curl up as if it was using Defense Curl. Lugia used Growl, no effect on Stranger Celebi. Lugia used Tackle. Lugia used Teleport, but could not escape. He tried again, and it still read the same thing, could not escape. And he tried 2 more times, and it did the exact same thing. Lugia became a tight silver ball, then it fell asleep and shrunk a little more. Wild Lugia has died. The poor Pokemon disappeared completely. This is the end of the battle? What confused me the most about the battle, despite the shrinking and the looping of random moves from Lugia, is that Celebi didn't have a health point taken from it. I checked my Pokemon team, guessing that it had changed over time taken by the fight with Lugia. The Celebi was gone, as were Ive and Bin, who had disappeared earlier. Now all that remained was a mysterious Eevee. There was also an Absol, which I thought was only obtainable in Ruby and Sapphire, and Emerald, and a Cubone. The Eevee's nickname was now Run. Absol's was Away, and Cubone's was Don't run away? I thought something bad would happen if I moved away from the Whirl Islands. So I edged my hand away from the control pad. I sat gazing at my GBA screen for 5 minutes before I grew bored. Daringly and regretfully, I stepped to the left. Oh, the text box were showing their messages in a backward and distorted way now. I went back to viewing the new Pokemon in my team. Did I scroll too fast through their sprites and names and missed an egg? Sure enough, there was an egg in the 4th slot in my party. Perhaps the O meant that an egg appeared. I decided to check my Pokemon while I was in the party menu. The Cubone, was at 1 HP, just like Away, the Absol. Run was perfectly healthy. I was shocked. We hadn't even battled since Lugia's encounter, yet the Pokemon at the front of my team were severely damaged. I hit the B button and returned to my trainer's sprite. There was a path of stone through the water leading to the left. Curious, I made my way down the path. It turned sharply north, and soon I was standing at the entrance of a blackened and beaten tower. I went through the door. I realized that this was Burned Tower, home of the legendary dog trio, Suicune, Raikou, and Entei. When I took my first step from the entrance, the cry of Suicune sounded through the speakers of my GBA. A text box appeared. Don't has died. So much death in this stupid hack. But I was frightened. I was also growing tired of all the death. I continued on through the tower, feeling my fingers trembling against the control keys, and I heard the sound of Raikou. Away has died. I expected Run to die as well after another 3 steps, but Run didn't die. It was still perfectly healthy. I checked the egg in my party. Its sprite had 2 small upper spots near the top of its shell, a tiny spot in the middle, and a large spot cut halfway off on the bottom. It differed much from its normal sprite, which made me shiver. The sprite was close to hatching, and my Pokemon's nickname had changed again. Run had become an unknown shape, like an exclamation point, and it was at the head of my party. I did have an Eevee, but its name had become Reborn. The other 3 Pokemon were Cyndaquil, Quilava, and Typhlosion, Cyndaquil's nickname being Now, Quilava's Before, and Typhlosion's It's. Run now before it's reborn? I let my gaze fall to the 6th slot in my party. I understood the warning completely. The egg that was close to hatching, something dreadful was to hatch from its shell. I hit the B button and watched the trainer sprite stand perfectly still. Have you ever wondered what happened if you said no to every question in a Pokemon game? If they asked for help, or if they asked you to get something, or go on an adventure with them? I'd never done that, and because I was curious, I ignored my Pokemon's warning and continued up Burned Tower, as if telling them no. Suddenly the sprite paused, and the screen shook violently. There was a roar, the same cry I heard before Lugia's battle, and then everything went silent. I checked my Pokemon team, then drew in a sharp breath. All the Pokemon were gone except for a Myuu and the egg. I checked the Myuu stats. The sprite wasn't its usual color. It was blood red. It had the fainted status, and 1 HP left, which was rather unusual since fainted meant 0 HP. Its ability was Wonder Guard, which only Shedinja should have. Wonder Guard only allowed super effective hits to strike the Pokemon with the ability. Its attacks were Grudge and Scary Face. Its nickname was 2L8. Too late. After returning to the trainer sprite, I had hardly taken a step before a text box caused Crad to stop. The text box read, "Oh." And it actually went to an egg hatching animation, but the egg would not hatch. It simply cracked all the way and then froze there. It was completely quiet for 5 minutes. It remained as so until a loud screech that sounded like an Entei blared through the speakers. The screen went black, and the sprite of Lugia faded in.
Crod's Day. Darkness.
A long moment of silence followed.
I warned you.
The sprite lifted its wings in a flash, then disappeared into the blackness. The Lavender Town music began to play, and red eyes gleamed. The song began to decrease in pitch, slow down, and soon it flipped backwards, and the song sounded like that sickening, distorted tune that you would hear in a horror movie. I felt my breath clog up in my throat, and fresh blankets of warm and slimy sweat trickled down my forehead. Lugia reappeared and opened its mouth wide, revealing what was inside, which was simply an endless dark void. A loud screech that sounded like sharp needle-like claws making a deep gouge in a chalkboard blared through the GBA speakers. Then the game froze, and the scream looped. It continued to play without stopping, again, and again. The cry was loud and deafening, and it slowly increased in pitch and got louder each time it replayed. From all that I experienced, I knew I wouldn't sleep tonight. Quick as light, I shut the GBA off, tore the Pokemon Silver cartridge out, and tossed it across my room. Although my room was completely silent, except for my heavy panting, I could still hear the pain screams from the Lugia that would always be reborn. 5 years passed since I had last touched the hacked cartridge of Pokemon Silver. And now, at age 17, calm and daring, I created a challenge, and I went to search through the boxes that contained my childhood items. It didn't take long to find the gray cartridge buried at the far bottom with my GBA beside it. I pulled them both out and stuck the cartridge inside the GBA slot. It started up like normal, and it went to the title screen. There was still no new game option, just like I remembered it. I remembered how much the game traumatized me as a child, and I still remembered the Lugia's ear-splitting cries. That didn't stop me now. The save file had a new name. Reborn, like my Eevee. It kept its original way of spelling and still didn't have the E. I smiled challengingly and selected it. I was standing in Burn Tower. One step, oh, I flinched at the text box, stunned. Then my surprise faded into irritation. No! No! Great, I grunted to the GBA screen. The egg hatching animation began, but halfway through the game froze. The music began to heavily glitch, and transparent static whooshed in the background. The picture would also often glitch, and sometimes a red flash would appear for a split second with 6 frighteningly familiar bold letters across the screen. R-E-B-O-R-N. Even in the dead silence, I could hear the Lugia's crazy screech among the hisses of the static from my GBA.